everyone, I'm Janneke Weermeester.
And I'm Nastasia Geviel. And welcome back to another very special GEM session where we invite experts from design, art, health, and industry to talk about the complex interaction between digital tech and well-being.
Yeah, so these GEM sessions are the result of the work that we've been doing at the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab, or the GEM Lab for short. And at the GEM Lab, we strive to develop and research ways in which digital tools can help to improve young people's mental health.
Yeah, and today we're super excited to present to you a very special edition, like I said, a behind-the-scenes version of a GEM session, because today we will be diving into GEM Lab's flagship game, MindLight. And MindLight is a game that's designed to help kids conquer their fears by using their minds and their brains as a game controller, which is super dope. And it's fair to say that MindLight was really one of the very first games to combine scientific rigor and insights, which have been taken from developmental psychology, with really fun and engaging gameplay.
Yeah, so our guests today are none other than the brains and hearts behind MindLight, Evan Hirsch and Professor Isabela Granic. And Evan and Isabel are co-founders of the PlayNice Institute, which creates scientifically validated games for kids and families. And additionally, Isabel is the director of the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab and professor at McMaster University. So yeah, Isabel's scientific expertise is balanced beautifully by Evan's vast design expertise built up over many years in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, we're super excited to share the chat that we had with these lovely people. So yeah, let's go.
Let's go.
Hi, Isabel. Hi, Evan. Thank you guys so much for joining today's special GEM session. And Yo and I really can't wait to do a deep dive into all things MindLight. So please take us back to the very beginning. How did this all start, and what was your inspiration to create MindLight the first time around, which I believe was 10 years ago? So Isabel, tell us all about that, please.
First of all, thanks for having us today. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time and feel like I've been having versions of it for, yes, about a decade. So MindLight and its inspiration started from my frustration and growing frustration around 10 years ago with the research that we had been doing on trying to find the best kinds of evidence-based interventions for young people struggling with learning how to regulate their emotions. And in particular, I had been doing work around cognitive behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral inspired interventions in schools, and looking at what works specifically to prevent anxiety and depression in these young people. And what we find over and over again is that in labs or academic contexts, cognitive behavioral approaches work, but when you put them out into the real world, about 40 to 60% of kids don't benefit. So that started to get really annoying. It was statistically significant, and we could pat ourselves on the back as academics that we were doing a good job, but actually in the real world, that doesn't really make sense, that half the kids are not benefiting. So I took basically a year to lurk around the context in which young people are particularly immersed in, learning well, thinking together, and kind of fell into video games, which seems like an odd thing to say because in psychology, video games have had a bad rap forever since they've been out, since my days of Pac-Man and, Space Invaders. And so, we are very much brainwashed into thinking about the negative impacts on video games. And what happened was that slowly I started to read the forums that young people were talking and being inspired in, and learning that they were learning lots of really interesting social skills, cognitive skills, motivational sort of skills and practices in the context of these video games. And so I thought, wow, I have a brand new idea. Let's use video games for learning. Of course, as soon as I then dove into whether anyone else had this brilliant idea, there had been, in the last 5 years from then, a sort of zeitgeist using serious games for learning in things like education, like math games, but also in medicine and other contexts where they gamified particularly boring lessons into things that could be motivationally inspiring. The problem was that those serious games sucked. They were boring. They looked like the chocolate covered broccoli that they were, and young people could see right through them. So we decided to take a different approach and invited a bunch of artists and designers who were already in the commercial space to talk with us about what makes a truly beautiful, inspiring, engaging video game. And that's where we sort of came up with a way of having science and art and design collaborate in these very transdisciplinary ways to create an experience that both respected the evidence base around cognitive behavioral principles that worked for anxiety, but also deeply respected what our souls needed, which was art and delight and joy and engagement and social interaction and even negative emotions, so that we could feel inspired to do something about those negative emotions. And so MindLight was born out of this kind of transdisciplinary interaction.
Yeah. And now you already mentioned that you had a transdisciplinary team, and you two come from two very different backgrounds, Evan and you as well. And I was kind of wondering, like, how did this even start, you teaming up together? How did you meet? How do you complement each other in this whole thing?
Yeah.
So the irony of the whole thing is, I'd spent 7 years in electronic arts. I built a motion capture studios, and I was in Europe, and I'd been at one point head of visual development for the studios, for 12 studios and all that.
Awesome.
And I was at Microsoft, and I worked in games there, and I worked in my team. We built Surface, and we did that. And then I was working in film, and then the last film project I was working on just collapsed, as they often did. And I picked up a little project with a guy at USC. I said, "Hey, can you help me with this psychology thing? I'm like, how does that work?" And his name's Skip Rizzo, and Skip was building something called Brave Mind, which is pretty impressive if you haven't seen it. And I just helped him skip out doing that, thinking I was just doing some visual design work on it. And one night at our weekly Sausage and Beard meeting, Isabel shows up with Rutger, her partner on the start of MindLight, and she says, "Oh, you make video games?" I'm like, "Yeah." It's like, "I make video games too." I'm like, "Great. Oh, this will be great. Another seriously not fun video game." And like only Isabel can do, she whips out her laptop in the bar and shows me the game, and then punches me in the arm and says, "Look at this." And I remember going, "You actually made this?" And I got punched again. And that's how our partnership was born. Because it was the first time I'd seen a serious game that I was like, that actually looks like a video game. It's something I might play. Because we used to joke around that serious games were serious in how bad they were.
Mm.
They were seriously bad, seriously not fun. And the first time I looked at mine, like, this is really cool. So I'm like, we should make something with this. So we started working on it. And for years we tried, and the timing wasn't right. And all of a sudden the timing's right again.
How the best partnerships tend to happen, right? You just kind of worlds collide. And that's when the magic happens, really. So let's get into the game itself, MindLight. So Isabel, maybe you can tell us a bit more, and the audience, obviously, what is the game about? Who is it meant for? And what was it designed to achieve? Because it has a very clear goal, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So MindLight is a video game that uses biofeedback to control the environment of the game. So biofeedback means that your body and your signals within your body are actually being fed into some kind of visualization that gives you information about how your body is feeling right now. And that gives you enough information to potentially help you think about regulating your physiology. And so the game was designed to address a huge problem, which is about 40 to 60% of kids as young as 8 years old have a problem with regulating their anxiety, and they don't learn how to regulate their anxiety. And if they don't learn how to regulate that anxiety, they can form into clinical problems. So what we wanted to do was give kids an opportunity to play a game and train themselves up in this really playful way to learn how to manage those difficult emotions, be brave and courageous, and stand up to their fears, and so on. So it was really meant as a game for anyone, any kid. All of us need to learn how to regulate our anxiety, and then to also be used if necessary in clinical context, in teaching context, in school context, and so on. And so the way the game works is it's a haunted house, and the player is told that they're going to grandma's house, and the player learns really early on that the house has become haunted, and that their job is to uncloak the darkness of this house through their own mind light. And there is no shooting, there is no active beating of the monsters with any kind of whatever firearm or anything like that. What you do is you use your own mind to grow light in this mansion, and the more light grows, the more the monsters are scared away. The more you uncover these little treasures all around, and so on. And it becomes increasingly scary over the course of the 4.5 to 6 hour game. And so young people are taught how to, first of all, approach their really scary context, and then to remain calm. The calmer you are, the bigger your light grows. The more anxious you are, the darker the environment gets into the video game. And so importantly, there are 2 ways to get this biofeedback. One is the original way that we designed the game, which is a 1-channel little headset that gets put on like a headband on the kids. They can do it really easily themselves. It's a super cheap device, so not these $20,000 devices that are usually used in academic context. And that reads your frontal brain waves, basically. And those frontal brain waves is enough for us to know the calmness of the child's mind. That gets fed in real time into the game, and that goes on and on across the whole course of the game, basically. So again, what you learn and what they get incentivized to do is to remain calm, grow their mind light as things get scarier and scarier in the context. And importantly, the difference between this game and a lot of meditation games that I'm sure people have heard about that use biofeedback is that we don't expect or want kids to stay calm in the entire game. There's a lot of these gardening meditation apps and so on that do that. But the problem is then people never learn how to actually regulate their emotions when they're in high stress, high anxious periods. And so the point was we needed to scare the bejesus out of kids enough times over the course of the game so that they would learn how to regain, and they would practice regaining that calm. And so that's basically the premise of the game, a little long. And importantly now to say that we now use not only the EEG headset, but kids can also use any kind of heart rate monitor like the Garmin watch, the iPhone watch as well. And again, heart rate in real time gets fed into the game in exactly the same way. The higher your heart rate is, the more anxious you are. The lower your heart rate is, the more calm you are. And that gets translated directly into light in the game.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's such an important thing, right? That kids get to train being able to handle these situations when it is actually scary, and not just when the sun is shining and everybody's friendly and it's all good.
What's so cool about this is that in games we spend months and sometimes years trying to get a good core loop. What does the player do as he get? And what Isabel and the team did was they made your body's feedback part of the core loop. And that's what's so cool about it, is that you're not clicking. It's what's going on in your body is part of the core loop, and the interaction is the feedback. And that's pretty cool. And what was interesting is before I met Isabel, when on our surface, we also learned that anytime people could do things in digital space and have something actual happen in the physical space, they just get wildly turned on. Mm-hmm. And it's a really neat effect to be able to cross the boundary, physical and digital.
Yeah, and this is really important also because in conventional, it's important to say we're not throwing out all of those scientific principles that have been shown to work, cognitive behavioral principles that there's evidence based around them. The problem is, or at least the hypothesis we went into 10 years ago, was that kids aren't engaged enough to practice these skills, especially in high anxious contexts, right? So we wanted to change just the vehicle, the engine with which we are sort of translating these skills into experiences for them. And that's why video games are used. So they're still based on cognitive behavioral principles. And so the important thing that Evan is pointing out is that we often talk to kids in these conventional school programs and clinical programs and so on. We taught them the basic idea that what is in your mind translates to how you see the world and how the world responds back to you. That if you learn how to change your interpretation of stressful situations as challenging situations, for example, the world will look different to you. You will feel better about it, and you will likely succeed. They all thought we were full of it. Because, of course, how do you tell a kid you change your mind and things in the reality actually change? And in this context, it's literally what's happening. And they get the experience over and over that as they relax, there's something in the video game that's changing, not through a joystick, but simply through changing their mind.
The other thing I think is so cool about this play mechanic is that you tell any kid to calm down, that's not going to work. And if a parent tells you to calm down, it's going to piss you off even more. At least that was my personal experience. Actually, speaking for a friend. And the point is that the game is teaching you to chill in the face of challenge. You can't tell somebody to do that, but when you reward somebody through the gameplay, it's a really amazing feedback loop.
Yeah, and clearly kids have been enjoying it a lot. We know from the very first version of MindLight. But now, obviously, you're all moving into MindLight version 2, which is exciting. We'll be launching this fall. Probably when you're listening to this, it's already out and you can get it. Yeah. So, Evan, maybe you can tell us a bit more about the development process of this second revamped version of MindLight.
So it's interesting because this is where my previous games experience came in. And of course, having made a lot of, big AAA games, all I could see was the flaws in the game. And the game is a great, fun game, but I just saw flaws. And so we originally we're just going to fix the camera, I think, Isabel, and maybe 1 or 2 levels. And then as time went on, I'm like, no, I don't like that either. We're going to fix that. And then we're going to fix this. And then we're going to fix that. So then I brought in a dear friend of mine, Marty Klein, who was did art direction on Stuart Little and all the Back to the Future films. And he helped us, and we reconciled the house. And we're like, wait a second, there's a whole house here. Why do we not take advantage of the whole house? And why is there like a 900-foot room or 900-meter room in the base? So we started having fun with it, and that let us have some more fun using the same mechanics to get much more creative. So the first thing we did is we kind of made it more of a logical flow. And then the other thing we did is we got clear that the game's really a platformer. It's actually an action adventure game. And once we started thinking of it as an action adventure game, and I didn't have to worry about the core mechanic because that's already developed, it became fun. So we reconciled that. We spent a lot of time doing that. The other thing is, as the father of a daughter, is you don't have to play as a boy. So now we have 3 boys and 3 girls you can choose from.
Finally, yes.
And I hear it's a rumor. It's not confirmed. I'll have to ask somebody over at PlayNice if it's true. But there's gonna be a 4th. There's gonna be a total of 4 boys and girls. Between now and the end of the year, we hope. But you get to choose a character that looks and feels like you, and I think that's a big deal. You get to have a voice that sounds like you, a male or female voice, and so we're doing stuff like that. And then we're also just trying to get the game to play more consistently and better. And we're improving the lighting a bit more. But what got fun is that once. And it's really funny because we talk about it now as a haunted house game, but we didn't talk about that for years. And it wasn't, I think, until Marty started doing some of the drawings that we realized it. And that gave us more freedom to actually play that further. And so we've got some great music now, and we bring some sound effects. So it's really gotten to be a much more complete experience. And we've also removed some of the grinding things that weren't fun in the old game. So it's that. And then the other thing that's really exciting is now you'll be able to play on tablets. So we updated the engine. And we're updating everything, and you'll be able to play on tablets and with the watch. And I think it's going to be a lot more accessible, so you can play whenever you want. And my secret hope is that a lot of parents play it too, because I don't know if you guys remember, there was a period when the Nintendo, the DS came out. It turns out one of the biggest groups buying were moms. And what happened was, like, the kids would play it, and the kids would outgrow it, and they leave it around. And also, we found out the moms were playing it. I'm like, well, that could work. Yeah. So it's just making the game really accessible and more fun. And so we're pretty close. We're hoping to start beta testing it next week, but the game's got a really good feel, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Are there any specific considerations that you had in mind while redesigning the music? Because you mentioned before, like, that you wanted to go back almost a bit more towards that haunted house environment. Is there any sort of specific vibe that you were trying to go for this time?
So the really lovely thing that we were able to do in this game is we know how important audio is for emotional experiences, whether they're joyful, curious, awe-inspiring, or anxiety-provoking, anger-making, frustration, and so on. And so we were able to go a lot more into the sort of exploration of the design of the audio. Indeed, my son was part of the team that composed the themes and some of the beautiful.
He composed the main theme. He did a great job, and Isabel's not involved in it.
No, not at all. It is so inspiring. And, this is also really important. Evan mentioned his daughter. And so the importance of having the ability, by the way, not only to choose boy, girl, but, non-binary. There are lots of hopefully representations of characters that people will just feel like they can go, that feels like me, which is really important for us in this version that goes out to the real world. So, considerations of his daughter and what she might like, considerations of my kids. My boys were 7, 8 when this game was being developed. They were part of the prototypers, and it meant a lot to us to make sure that it felt good for real children. And so in that same way, the fact that this is kind of also a family thing, that my boy was part of the composing team and they've been part of the testing, and Evan's girl has been seeing each version. She was on the website playing the game. It's just part of the fun and part of the sort of heartfelt commitment we have to designing this thing and finally getting it out to the people who actually need it after 10 years.
And that continues because the game developers now, we're using a studio in Colombia, and they all brought their kids in to play the game 2 weeks ago when I was down there, and they were having a blast. It was really neat. And the interesting thing about it is, and Isabel's been very strict with me about what age we're making the game for initially. And one of the kids was 13, and she was having a blast.
Of course.
And it was just neat. But it's kind of fun for them to be able to bring their kids into the game, or their cousins or their family in, and it's awesome. But yeah, it's very authentic.
Yeah, and that's the best test, right? When you see the target audience that you make it for, when these kids are really fully immersed and they're like into it, and that's the best proof. What's your favorite part about this second version of MindLight? You've obviously both been rebuilding it from the ground up, like you said, Evan. So you've seen all the intricacies. It's all fresh again. So what's your favorite bit about the new game?
I'm probably partial, but the attic is if in the old game there was the storage room with, I guess grandma ran a catering business in the old business where she had 7,000 chairs in her room, and so we swapped that out for the attic. And that's actually Isabel. Isabel's a hoarder. It's a little known fact. She's got a room in her house where she collects chairs and tables. She's a closet hoarder. No, but it's the attic, and then we're able to do some really fun things in the attic. And we've got 1 or 2 surprises, which I won't tell you now. But it's just been fun to get the attic, because I remember as a kid having to go up to the attic in my family's house to get stuff every now and then. I'd be terrified up there. And by kid, I mean 17 years old. I was terrified up there. But it's just like there's something cool about so it was just, let's have more fun, leverage what naturally be in a house. And then we've also introduced 1 or 2 new areas that again will surprise you with. But it's just I think keeping what we've done and just expanding it and just really filling in the game around it, I think that in itself is a lot of fun. I think it's gonna be a really nice experience.
Yeah. What about you, Isabel? What's your favorite part? It doesn't have to be a space, right? It could also be
I know.
Feature.
I think my favorite part of this part of the process is to see, we always had this feeling that it would take very little money and very relatively little oomph and time to take this prototype and make it something that we're all really proud of, and that not only do kids want to play it, but the parents behind them say, let me have a chance to do this as well. And so, I should really importantly acknowledge this last bit of money very specially came from Temple World Charity Foundation. And it, without getting into the exact dollars, it's a little baby drop of any kind of budget for a real video game out in the commercial world.
I've never made a game for anywhere near this small a budget.
That's right. And this is
not even PlayStation 1 days.
Yes, there you go. So it was incredible. We had this idea that really, because we had the core loop, because we had the experience pretty nailed down, the design brief, as we call this, the goal, the North Star for design, was crystal clear to the whole team. We have an amazing team down in Colombia. This is South America, not Columbia University or something like that. That to me is something that's just magic, because I kept saying, can we just get a little bit? And then it's off to the races. And it was just that little bit to get us over the hump so that we can get it onto, a platform that anyone can access the game. And so for me, that's magic. That's the wow, we actually can do this. And it is, 98% through Evan's leadership of the creative team that, he's been able to usher this. Because I did my part not 10 years ago, but let's say for 5 years I worked on this, and it was the science and the randomized control trials and all that. But from then it was sort of like, here you go. And they took off. So I can't, the reason I say this is not only because I'm deeply inspired by this and it's my favorite part, but also because I think people underestimate what they can do with relatively little money if they have a framework for understanding how this science translates into really good design, and how important that intentional design and scientific work is for the final product to not have to be bajillions of dollars. Now, of course, tons of science money went into it, and this is public money. We got grants for millions to look at the science underlying that, and I don't underestimate that. But I guess I would like to sort of put out a call to other designers who care about this, that we at GEM have been building prototypes that anyone could take and make a huge impact on young people's mental health if they would just take these principles and run with the development process. And I know this goes beyond MindLight, but it's something that feels generative to me.
I think it definitely goes beyond MindLight. And I think it's very inspiring because, it can be quite a challenge, as we have seen, to get these games from a prototype phase where it starts with a lot of science behind it to somewhere where someone can actually play it. Mm-hmm. And I think in this sense, if you are now showing, hey, it can be done, and we did it, yes, a lot of other people, I hope, at least, can pick up that mantle and bring more of these awesome games into the world.
That's to say, the thing that's interesting to me is, if I answer your question thinking about it now, the second time, is that the coolest work we did on this, no one's going to see, because it was the work I did with Isabel and you guys at the GEM years ago on figuring out how we created, that work we did to create that rapid design loop with the test user iteration, validating the science, and is it fun? Is it scientifically good? And those rapid loops we did, that is some of the most impressive work we've done. And nobody gets to see that per se. Yeah. Right? You get to see the end result. And Isabel's point about, for scientists and designers that they want to do this, that this notion of that you can, with paper, prove out a science theory and prove out, is it fun or not, and do that. And that doesn't cost a lot of money. It just costs time and effort and thoughtfulness. And that's probably the most important thing that comes out of this, even though, don't kid me, we want to make a game that succeeds so we can do more of these. But I think the most important, and the most, for me, somebody's been doing this for 35 years, the most exciting part was this part where we learned how to make design and science work so nicely together. Mm-hmm. And still keep it fun. Like the fact that we can talk about fun in the GEM lab as much as we can talk about scientific validity, that's kind of cool.
Can you give an example of some of that little bit of invisible work that you might not think went behind this?
So, I think what is now what we're working on, again, with Templeton funding on Bloombox, is the tools that 10 years out have emerged from some of this early experimentation. So what Evan's talking about is, for example, we had an important goal, a scientific goal, that we needed to actually trigger anxiety in kids so that they would be motivated to learn how to regulate it. And so often what we do in more traditional cognitive behavioral approaches that are scientifically grounded is that we teach them to do homework in this context and to recite ways of doing this regulation, but they're not actually doing it in this emotionally hot context. So that scientific idea, that science-based idea, came from science, first of all, extant research, and secondly, needed to be validated experimentally with real data that I would argue actually isn't that easy to get, because we had hundreds of kids go through these things. But at the prototype level, we then went to the designers and artists and said, we need triggers in the game that are actually authentically scary to these kids, but not too scary that they run away, right, from the game itself. And so we had all sorts of prototypes on paper, like art drawn on paper, of these monsters and what would they look like throughout the game. And science had very little to say about the actual aesthetics of these monsters. But design said, first of all, here are 4 ideas that we know. Color matters, shading matters, expression matters, and importantly, design principles matter. So we have to experiment with real kids. We have to do user research, which this is not the domain of science. And so we took these pictures, these profiles of these monsters, and went to real kids and said, what scares the bejesus out of you? Scientifically, and as adults, not even scientifically, but as adults, we were like, definitely those one-eyed cats are freaking us out. The kids looked at them and said, these are the cutest minions ever. They're wonderful. We would never get. So you understand that the entire game would have been ruined if we hadn't taken design principles, applied them in this user research very early on with a paper and pencil kind of art. And so that's an example of science working with designers, where we came together, we looked at data together, and we looped in terms of the actual look of the game, but also the main trigger of the game. And then, of course, we measured heart rate. We measured kids' responses and asked them. We also measured parental responses to these things and whether they improved over time when they played the game. So that's the science element coming back in. And so there's an example of one loop that I can give you concretely.
Yeah.
What's interesting for me is that I've always known as a designer, if no one and I say as a joke now when I teach, like, if no one uses your design, then it's not a design, it's art. Right. And if people don't work with it, engage it. So, after working with Isabel all these years now, and when I talk to medicine communities as well as mental health, it's like engagement is efficacy. If they don't engage, you can't do a thing. I don't care how good your science is if they don't engage. And people are now starting to get their head around it. And the funny thing is, some of my colleagues in user research are cringing when Isabel says that that's not the science, but the social science on the user research side it's also a thing that you can measure now, and we're learning how to measure that side by side. But if people don't want to play with your thing or touch your thing, medicine can't work if you don't take it.
So true. And so, it seems that really the work began way back when the foundation had to be laid. So, right, thinking about your target audience, thinking about the scientific principles and the psychological mechanisms. And I guess that's literally kind of the foundation that your game house is built on, right? So if that's not strong and sturdy and well thought out, then you're going to run into challenges. We know that that's all right with MindLight version 2, but were there any other challenges that you guys ran into while you were doing this remastering?
Yes, because Isabel and I felt very strongly we wanted to make the game more accessible and more portable. Putting on tablets has been an interesting challenge because, one thing I'm really happy with is we've got the game running now on a Kindle Fire, which is roughly $100, but on Amazon Prime days it's $50. But getting the game to work on that cheap of device has been, after we did all the time to make the game prettier and better, now playing out so it doesn't look cheap to run on that device has been an interesting challenge. And then getting and just dealing with Android in general can be a challenge of the way different drivers work and the Macintosh, different things. So getting the connectivity and getting the responsivity work, it's boring, but it's been a good thorn in my side. And then the other thing that's been interesting is privacy. A lot has changed in 10 years, and things you guys do in the lab, you don't have to worry about privacy because people are engaging in a scientific study and they consent to it. But with all of the great things that have happened in social media, all the abuses of privacy have made it a real issue. And because we're parents and we're both sensitive to this, and we don't want our kids being tracked, but we also need to collect that data to make the game work. So there are some states where we're not allowed to do that. And so how do we deal with that? Or how do we also, just from an ethical point of view, do a very informed consent to parents that we're going to have this data, but we're never going to sell it? So one of the biggest challenges right now is designing a new website so parents can create an account that gives us the rights to collect the data. And we're going to get rid of it after 30 days and we're never going to sell it. But it's a horrible user experience to have to create an account where your parent has to validate that they're an adult and not you. Yeah. And then that allows us to unlock the game, so then we can collect the data for 30, just so we can see how the game is working. So we need to keep the kids' data for a little while to make sure the game's working the way we think it's working. And so it's been really interesting dealing with privacy, and it's probably the least exciting part of the job. But if we get that wrong, we're not in business and we can't get the game out. So I think that's been the other challenge. But the fun of it is that working now with teams a little bit, some folks in Europe, South America, and North America, is what's going to be really cool is we're going to ship the game in 2 languages to start, and then we'll have French coming right behind it. So it's the game's going to be available for a lot of people really quickly.
Amazing.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's, sorry, just to really quickly to jump in, that security issue sounds boring or whatever it is, but it means a lot to us, as Evan said, around these are 8 to 12-year-old kids that we're trying to aim to have an impact. And we could easily get frustrated with these little like dinky things and go, it doesn't matter, or let's not collect data. But because we care about like future iterations and we want to keep updating the game, which is really important, that it's not just a one-shot deal. You might benefit from the, scientifically we know that kids' anxiety will go down by half in about 5 to 6 sessions, right? So we have replicated this several times. This improvement goes out 6 months after they stop playing the game. So this is hugely important. But what I find really fun is the idea that there will continue to be challenges in all our lives. I'm going to have to give a talk in a week, and I'm terrified by that particular talk and the audience. And wouldn't it be nice to have a playful way to kind of boost up your skills and remind yourself what works, right? And so what we want to do is keep updating the content, keep building up the house, keep making it fun and interesting with little surprises so the parents can download new content over time and keep this experience new and engaging for kids. And of course, to do that, we want to continue to be able to track what works, what engages kids most, what doesn't work, not on a individual name basis or none of that kind of sensitive data. It's all anonymous, et cetera. But on a telemetrics is what they call it, like on a level where we understand what's working, across the game. And so that's really important to us. And we have to balance that with, absolute valid concerns of parents and kids later on as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of things like more languages, more data. Is there anything else that you're very excited for what the future holds for MindLight?
So Isabel touched on it. So one of the cool things when I think we resolve the house design, we designed in a way that as people finish the game, we can open up more rooms in the house. And we've already got some fun ideas to make it a little nuttier and a little more fun. So I think that's a big part of it. And there's a new puzzle in the game that we're not telling people about. We want to see if they discover it, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. So the kind of promising future, like post 1 year, that we're, especially if people are excited about MindLight, as we hope they will be, and we get some funds from that back into the company to design, we're deeply excited about making an adolescent and adult version. Ooh. Same exact mechanic, right?
Yes.
It's going to be reading your physiology, but now we've got some like serious horror kind of games that you can do for, adults and older adolescents. And what's really cool about that is we already know from really good research that we use media to regulate our emotions. We use horror so that we can look at something and have some sense of control even while we're feeling aroused. And that helps us kind of move through our otherwise chaotic, unpredictable influx lives as we're all experiencing with, everything global going wacky, right? So media helps us not just entertain and give us some joy, but also has already showed. But of course, these media mostly are not tracking individual physiology, right? They're kind of in this more global way. And so what we're really excited about is to just start doing this with adults. And it's just changing the art mostly to make it much more appropriate. And some of the kind of puzzles and the extent to which they're more complex and so on, so that they're applicable to now the parents of these kids. We know that 75% of kids who are anxious have parents that also struggle with anxiety. Wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if they had a companion game. They could talk with their kids, less stigma around all of us trying to deal with our anxiety in a playful way that we can talk about openly and so on. So that to me is a road that will be really interesting to start up in about a year.
Yeah. So all of us adults can start fighting, alarm clocks and deadlines and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. No, well, so we're really excited about the launch of MindLight, and I would say that's it for you guys. Thanks so much for joining, and please do share with us where can people find MindLight.
PlayMindLight.com will be the website for the game. It'll be up in a few weeks. By the time this is out, it'll be up. And it'll be available on the Androids, the Google Play Store, probably the Amazon Store, Apple Store, Steam, and probably Microsoft Windows stores. It'll be on all the stores.
Wow.
All the app stores.
And, that's the awesome part, and what we want to do from the get-go is part of this DNA is accessibility, and what we've been trying for all of so that's great. And also for parents and even kids themselves who are interested in the science behind this, because a lot of people say that it's science-based, and what they mean is they read a couple of journal articles and they use a couple of words that are the lingo or whatever jargon of science. Really importantly, the game itself has been tested with real kids, hundreds and hundreds of kids that we have compared to actual cognitive behavior, like the gold standard of therapy out there. And so for anyone interested in kind of deep diving into the science aspect, of course, they can come to gemlab.com and they can find all the science they want, and whether in video format, in articles, peer-reviewed journals. We've tried to make them all open access scientific journals that people can read on their own. And I would encourage people to do that, actually, to feel kind of the confidence that they can feel in the game.
All right. Yeah, so check out the PlayNice website, check out the GemLab website if you want to know more. And yeah, we are very excited to see what else is in store for MindLight in the future, and we can't wait to play it. Thanks everyone else watching also for tuning in for this special MindLight edition of the GEMH Sessions. And we hope to see you at the next one.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Bye, all.